Mr. Chairman, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, good evening. When Joel came to sit down, I whispered to him that you've given a good summary of the reason why I'm here. And I'm happy to see some of my old senior brothers and senior members here. Now, this topic is being discussed at a time when we as a nation are struggling to properly define our secondary education space, which in my view is nuancing towards a restricted view of grammar education, despite the spirited efforts government is making to broaden the narrative and discourses to include the technical, vocational education and training and other subsidiaries such as the science, the technology, engineering, and mathematics. Interestingly, much of this debate has arisen within the shadows of the government's flagship program of the free SHS. The excitement and enthusiasm generated in the program and the contested positions of whether it has benefited only the poverty reduction and access dimensions rather than the crucial issue of quality, which is inspired by the availability of funds, are proof of our resolve as a people that we are determined to go to every extent to develop our education. As the policies designed to ensure participation of all school-age children in primary education start bearing fruit, and as a larger proportion of children complete primary education, there has been a strong pressure at the higher levels of the education system. How to finance secondary education expansion, how to organize it, and what to teach at that level have become burning issues. Secondary education is indeed a crucial stage for the education system. This is where most primary school teachers are trained. It is where the future students of higher education are selected and taught essential foundation skills. Equally, students with secondary level education form the pool from which middle level manpower for industry is drawn. Students enter secondary schools as children and leave as young adults. What they experience at that level influence the course of the rest of their lives. It is the level at which young people consolidate their basic knowledge gained at the basic level, but also where they acquire the common culture that could allow them to be useful citizens in a peaceful society, where they build knowledge through experience and experiments, where essential subjects such as science, health, education, and technology are first taught in a formal way. And finally, this is where young people learn to think, how to be, how to work, and how to cooperate with others. In delivering this lecture, I recognize the opportunity that the audience has to delve into further discussion. Hence, I present both official and personal perceptions and expectations on governance, management, and financing of secondary education in Ghana, to chart a path for the discussion as we look into the future. As the title suggests, we'll be looking at governance of secondary education and management, and because of time, I may combine this. Then we'll look at the financing of secondary education, which I believe will be very, very interesting topic to discuss. In doing that, we will look at the historical development of secondary education funding. And we ask ourselves, if it is your business, will you continue on this path? Then we end with some policy choices that will ensure financial sustainability, recommendations, and a short conclusion. So, I wouldn't want to bore you with reading, but I would just, because of the context of governance and management, I want to refer to the Act Section 3 of the Pre-Tertiary Education Act, 2020 Act 1049, includes in its explanation of free secondary education a sense of what secondary education is. It presents secondary education as being essentially composed of many forms, including the technical and vocational institutions. Although it does not mention grammar-type education, a cue taken from the white paper delivered as the government response to the Animal Ministers Committee's report refers to grammar-type schools as an offering for secondary education in Ghana. Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, the official governance structure of secondary education is three-tiered. First is the General Oversight Body, which is the Ministry of Education, followed by the Education Service, formerly known as the Ghana Education Service. I'm sure that will not go away. And then the school system. Subsequently, then diffused into a sparse arrangement to include parents and guardians, the community in which the school is located, and the past students of the schools. It is worth clarifying here that the participation of learners is in the school system. Section 1B of the Pre-Tertiary Act states that secondary education comprises 3 years of senior high school and 3 years of technical and vocational education and training. Section 4, subsection 2, 3, and 4 is about the management of pre-tertiary schools, and stipulates that the Regional Education Directorate shall take responsibility for the effective and efficient management of senior high schools. The Technical and Vocational Education and Training Service shall take responsibility for the effective, everything about the Act is effective and efficient, of the pre-tertiary technical and vocational education and training. Faith-based schools shall enter into memorandum of understanding with the Education Service for the effective and efficient management of faith-based schools. Now, Section 11 of the Act is about the functions of the Governing Council. That the Council shall advise the Minister on policy, ensure the effective and efficient implementation of basic and senior higher education system, ensure the effective performance of the functions of the Education Service, and advise on any other matters relating to the basic and senior higher education that the Minister may request. Now, the interesting part is Section 37, which states that, which is about the management of public basic and senior high school. A school management committee for the management of public basic school, or a board of governors for the management of a public senior high school, shall be formed. A school management committee or a board of governors shall ensure that a public basic or senior high school is managed in accordance with the laid down rules and regulations of the Education Service. My interest in this is in the fact that this group of people are not allowed to do their work. Now, let me jump and move on. So some features that pop up so clearly are regulation, decision-making, enforcement, effectiveness, and efficiency. In effect, governance of secondary education poses questions about how secondary education is regulated, the types and processes of decision-making, what rules and guides are being enforced, and how these are tuned to ensure effectiveness and efficiency. In this case, the expectation is that each of the tiers will understand its role, so that when furniture is needed in a school, nobody will call the Minister of Education and put their request or complaint to him, when at the local level, the board and the district director of education are available. The Director General technically reports to the Governing Council, which is the Education Service Council. In practice, however, it does appear that instructions and directives from ministers of education over the years tend to have more prominence, and sometimes without the knowledge of the GS Council. This has led to an overbearing influence of the Ministry of Education in the day-to-day running of the education service. This is not good for the development and effective management of our secondary schools. The expectation is that with the governance and management system in place, neither the Director General nor the Minister of Education will perform the role of a headmaster or a headmistress. The lack of clarity regarding the clear delineation of some of these roles and the penchant to interfere in the roles assigned to other levels of management have undermined the governance and management structures established by law and created the impression that every problem should be resolved in Accra. There appears to be a missing link or overexuberance that is undermining the communication between these three tiers, or among these three tiers. In 1987, the government of Ghana embarked on a process to decentralize education management to districts throughout the country as part of a program of a wider social democratic governance reforms. A vital element of this reform was the prescription of active community participation in the affairs of schools within their localities. The establishment of school management committees, SMCs, at the basic level, and the reconstitution of the governing boards at the second cycle level, and the recognition of PTAs were to create a new school governance landscape based on community participation, as well as a devolution of power to the metropolitan, municipal, district assemblies, and schools. The education institutionalization, unfortunately, has not been allowed to work. As such, the education service, like all other public service agencies, still operates a rigidly centralized system, and the common expression is only one person in GS has address, which is the Director General. Centralized systems of management and governance creates numerous leadership and management challenges, including delays in disciplinary matters, delays in service delivery, and denies the development of skills. It is one thing to pass legislation that shifts power, authority, and responsibility and influence from one level to the other. Such a shift is a change in structure only. But it is another thing to build the capacity at the school level to enable the desired impact on learning, management, and leadership at the school level. The need for capacity is no doubt real, but it is sometimes overstretched or used as a facade or an excuse to delay the empowerment of decentralized levels at the decentralized levels, and thus delay the devolution of functions to them. Within the dynamically changing context under which schools now operate, school management has taken on a completely different dimension and show marked contrast in roles and responsibilities. School management now requires the participation and collaboration among members of the school community, board of governors, parents, and all students, missions, the development of skills in leadership management and in decision-making, planning and budgeting, while the leadership skills of school administrators, particularly those of an interpersonal orientation, such as negotiation, consultation, conflict resolution, building ownership, and commitment to decisions emerge as critical for school heads to contend. Now, some key issues I would like us to reflect on as I end this session on governance and management. 1, understanding of roles of various actors and their obligations, respecting the functions of other actors, and ensuring compliance as defined by law. It's important. Number 2, are secondary schools over-regulated in the governance, decision-making, and enforcement of rules and procedures, including disciplinary matters, which always have to be finally pronounced by the Director General? And I say this because when we were in school, at least those days, our time at Prempeh College, Osan, Mr. Rena at Achimota School, F.K. Bua, O.K. Money, J.J. Mensakane, and those people, as if they owned the school. They took full responsibility. I'm not sure at that time we were kids. I'm not sure whether they were controlled as much as we see now. And they produced all-round people. I remember all those who came from Achimota School at UST. To UST. They were different. The Van Sanforms and Ralph Sutherland and many of them, Betul Nunu, they were all-round people. Academics, they were there. Sports, they were there. Everything. And I remember sometimes when we were hard-pressed in Ghana, Ralph and some of his colleagues represent Ghana in the Ghana Abidjan Games because of their training in Achimota School. Now, our school boards clothed with the authority and space to play its role as governing body in the capacity of boards. In the composition of boards, are there requisite mix of skills? Are the requisite mix of skills needed for effective governance form the basis of deciding on who sits on school boards, including the representatives of interest groups? To what extent does the Education Council appreciate its own oversight role of governance of the education service, and what should be the nature of engagement between it and the Minister of Education? Why have stakeholders been too quiet and allowed Minister of Education and Director General to run the show? Where are the voices of parents and the missions? All we hear is that we want our school back. Speak. And those students. Those schools are of different sizes and varied. A one-size-fits-all approach has been adopted in the regulation and management. Interestingly, all schools are classified, with Class A schools being about 60. Heads of schools, school management, and governing boards have little or no discretion to vary instructions received from the Director General or the Education Service or the Minister of Education. And the governing board and DS Council are normally always very quiet. So these are some few areas that we may be thinking about. Now, financing of secondary education in Ghana. Financing secondary education is currently a hot yam in the mouth. The inadequacy of sustainable financing for secondary education is a major challenge in the running of schools. Indeed, decisions about education financing are necessarily political, and with the introduction of free SHS, spending on schooling, especially at the secondary level, has become more political than ever. In this section, My presentation will be guided implicitly by these 4 key questions on education financing. That's if time allows me to finish. How much should be spent on schooling, and what level of spending is reasonable? Who should pay for schooling? Parents, governments, other stakeholders, and how should the cost be shared? How may resources be distributed and allocated to the constituent parts of a school system? How do we increase education outcomes, access, equity, quality at reduced or reasonable cost? I relate these questions to financing and sustaining the free SHS. To put the discussion in context, permit me to start a historical review of the development of secondary education financing in Ghana, with specific emphasis on policies relating to secondary education finance. Also, the section presents a review of trends in secondary education expenditure, as well as the sources of financing secondary education in Ghana. I also draw on financing models of some selected countries. Now, on historical development of secondary education funding, it started from Governor Gaisfer's time. This was evident from the 13th section of the 16 Education Principles of the Educational Ordinance of 1925, which states that education cannot be compulsory and free. A vigorous attempt to expand financing of secondary education by the central government started in the early 1950s. Nkrumah's administration placed great emphasis and attention on secondary education, since the government regarded it as the nucleus for educational human resource and national development. Hence, in contrast to the colonial era, the Accelerated Development Plan for Education of 1951, introduced by Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, supported the financing policies of free compulsory education. But it didn't last long. The Education Act of 1961 also advanced the cost of equity provision to enable both deprived and privileged groups to benefit from education. However, the Act did not address all problems relating to the management of funds in schools. For example, the abolition of the fees varied in different regions of the country. In the North, parents were made to pay for books. In the North, parents were not made to pay for books, while in the South, they had to pay. An example of those who can pay, let them pay. Now, secondly, supporting mission schools and private schools to become fee-free was a complex issue, which raised questions about the definition of free education for all children and whether the definition was shared by all. In 1973-74, the government of Ghana's new perspective on education financing was to increase cost effectiveness, cost recovery, and to reduce misapplication of financial resources. To this end, it was to phase out all residential and feeding subsidies at the secondary and tertiary levels, as well as increased textbook user fees at these levels. Another aspect was the policy to develop loan and scholarship systems for poorer students. Implicit in this new provision was equity, suggesting that free education should not necessarily be applied to all children. Thus, for cost effectiveness, parents who are capable of paying should be made to fund their wards' education. The 1987 education reform was to contain and partially recover educational costs and to enhance sector management and budgeting procedures. The FQ policy of 1996 extended the compulsory and free education policy. But we know that at a certain point, whilst it was going on, there were certain kinds of fees that were not covered. The full cost of financing secondary education in Ghana is made up of investment and recurrent cost. And the recurrent cost is also made up of salary, which constitute the highest proportion contributed by government, and non-salaries to be borne by parents. As a result of the general increase in the cost of education due to inflation, the recurrent cost also increased together with the non-salary contributed by parents. Now, as I prepared for this, I made reference to a paper that I published in 2018. That was a fee-free secondary education in Ghana. Reflections on the past, realities, and feasible choices. On the past, meaning that we have to look at other interventions. F-cube, school feeding, and what about the third one? F-cube, school feeding, and that's the third one. And a capitation grant. These things, they start as a pilot, and it's only the year that they start and it continues. After some time, it fizzles out. There are challenges, there are problems, and instead of sitting down and brainstorming and decide and chart a different path, we keep following the same path. The paper that I published was a reflective analysis rooted in both historical and contemporary expressions of education financing in Ghana. It considered the feasibility of the policy, its sustenance, and drew on past policies and practices in Ghana and other country experiences. It reflected on the past pro-poor interventions in Ghana and their outcomes. Findings suggested that a universal fee-free policy will be burdensome on government's limited resources and affect the quality of education delivery. The paper concluded that a gradualist approach or a phased implementation of the program through means testing and pro-poor targeting could lead to better management and practice of the policy. Emeritus Professor Kid Lowen, who has researched extensively on secondary education financing, contends that systems that adopt selective fee waivers are able to achieve the target of increasing enrollment compared to systems that adopt a completely fee-free secondary system, stressing that there is more equity in systems that adopt selective fee waivers in comparison to fee-free systems. In a study in 2008, our own Professor Kwame Champon, now at Open University UK, pointed out that boarding fees alone constituted about 60% of total student costs of the Ghanaian secondary school student. Per the details of the 2022 free SHS budget submitted to Parliament and approved, I didn't get the actual, but whether the actual or what was presented is neither here or there. It was what we submitted as Education Ministry and approved is what is important. The cost of boarding fees alone for the combined cohorts from SH1, SH2, SHS1, SHS2, SHS3 is now 81.2%. And I'll show figures later to reflect this, of total student cost, which means what is being spent on day students is less than 20%. Now, country experiences. For the want of time, I'll be detailed on the case of India, but I've looked at Sri Lanka, where additional contributions were made to the budget by paying some facility fees. Thailand, the lower level education was made free for students only in selected villages. In Kenya, there were provision of bursaries and scholarships only for needy students, because they started and they also had some problems. In Zimbabwe, at a point in time, considered that full financing for secondary education was not sustainable, and reviewed how to make better use of existing capacity without unsustainable cost burdens. At a point, they explored whether the resources available could be used to contribute to less conventional modes of delivery, distance and mixed mode education were explored, and they've played a significant role in the development of their secondary education. Malawi. In a study in Malawi, they recommended that if non-essential boarding was abandoned or charged at the full rate, secondary enrollments might be increased without additional expenditure. Uganda, and so on and so forth. But the India one is interesting. Interesting because they thought seriously about it. Now, in India, in 2007, India attempted to universalize secondary education. Unlike elementary education, the Indian Constitution does not guarantee commitment to making secondary and post-secondary education free. Prior to the implementation of the universalization program in 2007, the highest advisory body on education in India set up a subcommittee in 2004. Prior to the universalization in 2007, a body was set up in 2004 to prepare a blueprint for the program. At the end of the subcommittee's work, 3 major recommendations were made. I'll just read one. The program should be decentralized, with each state developing its own plan. Now, in India, expansion focused primarily on 4 main groups. These included street children, ethnic minorities, rural settlers, and child laborers. Each group had specific programs that targeted their special needs. For rural settlers, the government started by building pay-setter schools. The government encouraged the setting up of residential schools for ethnic minorities, and also introduced residential bridge courses for street children and child laborers. But what I want to read is what the Prime Minister said when he was inaugurating this. The Prime Minister, at the launch of the universalization of secondary education, succinctly posited, and I quote, "We are setting out the goal of universalization or of universalizing secondary education. This is clearly the next steps after universalizing elementary education. While the goal is laudable, much work needs to be done before we are in a position to launch the scheme for universalization of access for secondary education. Its details need to be quickly spelled out and discussed." Please listen. Its details need to be quickly spelled out and discussed with states so that we are fully ready to launch it from 2008-2009. Right. We must not underestimate the complexity of this task, as the principles for universalizing elementary education cannot be easily transferred to secondary education. The Prime Minister speaking. Clear. Clearly, recognition by the Prime Minister not to underestimate the complexity of the program is a caution worth considering. Now, I've talked about the F-cube. I've talked about the capitalization grants briefly. All I'm saying, there were problems with it, which we should have learned from it. And we didn't. Now, let's look at some figures. Some trends in expenditure by level of education. Sorry. Okay. Right. Right. Now, this is from 2012 to 2015, but it's up to 2022. I'll show that later on. Now, look at the preschool budget 2012, 2013, 2014, 2015, and then look at the levels. And then look at what SHS sorry. Right. You know, this SHS. Before, sorry, I think, yes. Before SHS, which started in 2017. So these are the levels. I've done a summary at the end of, so you look at it. Okay. Now, 2016 was the last year of, that's pre-SHS. Now, sorry? Yeah, pre-free SHS. Yeah, pre-free SHS. Yes, thank you. Now, look at 2016, the money spent on preschool was 484, and this is in millions. In millions. So it's actually Citi million. And primary was 1.3 trillion. And JHS was 1 trillion. SHS had 786 million. Now, look at 2017. Preschool reduced to 15 million. Primary, 40 million. JHS, 39 million. And then free SHS started increasing, 571 million. You look at the percentage. Then it goes on like that, all through. At a point 2018, preschool had 6 million, and primary 14 million, JHS 8 million, and free SHS took a chunk of it, 1.1 trillion. Those of you who are very much aware of the Annual Mensa Committee report, which introduced the preschool or the KG, the whole idea was to strengthen the basic education. Fine. As a family, when we embark on a new journey and we have to withdraw money from here and there and so on, maybe first year, second year, and the third year, fine. But we should know that if we want to continue for the fourth and fifth year, we are killing some other levels. And that is my worry. Others going down for some period because of what we have embarked on, I have no problem with it. But what plan do we have as a country to ensure that we don't continue to weaken the very foundation of the education system? Now, the interesting bit of it, oh, sorry. You see, when you are not used to some of these things. Yes. Yeah. So the interesting bit of it is the summary. Yes. Where I've combined all the basics together with the preschool, primary, and JHS, right, in 2016. It was 2 trillion. Now, from 2017, see the totals. You know. Now, I think that this is a very, very, very serious thing. But let's just end by let's look at this one. This is just for us to see the ratio between the day and the boarding for the first year students or the first semester of the 2022 academic year. That the fee per semester and total amount is what is on the right, and the percentage was on the right. 23.77%. Now the overall for the second semester was this. Yes. Now this is the consolidated one. All 3 cohorts, what I referred to earlier, from 1 to from 3, 19% as against 81. Now, let me just conclude. Reflecting on the issues raised above, implementing free secondary education in Ghana may have been more desirable if a gradualist approach or a phased implementation of the program had been adopted. Learning from other country experiences could lead to better management and practice of the policy. With the problem of inadequate resources and delays in fund release to schools, as had been with other safety net interventions in the past, a strategy for means testing to target the poor and the vulnerable could have been adopted as an initial phase. Such a strategy, no doubt, will be another task in a country where a lot of income is earned in the informal sector, thereby making it difficult to assess real family income levels. I do not think as a country we have many options. The argument about free secondary education often focuses on issues about access and not enough about the content and the outcomes expected. Matters about skill development, teacher orientation and reorientation and training and development, as well as new pedagogical approaches, are less stressed. Clearly, a fair attention to all these is likely to produce students ready to transition either to the tertiary level or to the world of work. The policy of making secondary education free and available to all is a lofty one. But such a goal would be useless and needlessly expensive if all it does is to create opportunities to give young people access without the skills that will make them great assets for the nation's development. Reforming what will be taught and how they are taught are important. Otherwise, the problems are likely to be compounded. I thank you.